In the intense heat of Florida, Marina, a 42-year-old woman, was enjoying the cool sea breeze that came through the open windows of her large house, right in front of the beach. The place, which used to be full of noise, with friends laughing and family gatherings, was now quiet since her husband was always traveling for work. Amidst this silence, the phone rang. It was her younger sister, Renata, asking for a favor. She needed Marina to take care of her nephew, Felipe, for a few weeks. Before starting, make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this. Now let's go. Something about the young man's arrival made her heart beat differently, even if she couldn't explain exactly why. When Felipe arrived at 22 years old with an innocent smile and a confidence that seemed very mature for his age, Marina felt butterflies in her stomach. She tried to hide it, but it was impossible to ignore the impact that her nephew had on her. "Aunt Marina, thank you so much for having me," Felipe said, hugging her with a warmth that disarmed her. "You don't need to thank me, Felipe. This house is yours now, too," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. In the first few days, everything seemed peaceful. Felipe would spend hours studying in his room or running along the beach at dawn. Marina, on the other hand, tried to fill her time with anything, but his presence was like an electric current in the air, always making her restless. One afternoon, while Marina was watering the plants in the backyard, the hot sun made sweat run down the back of her neck. Felipe appeared out of nowhere. "Do you want some help, Aunt?" he asked, picking up a watering can and joining her. She couldn't help it, her eyes fixed on his broad shoulders and the calm way he worked. The heat that day seemed more intense, but she wasn't sure if it was just the weather or something else. When night fell, the two decided to prepare dinner together. The kitchen was small, which forced them to be close together. As they cut vegetables, their hands briefly touched, and Marina felt a shiver run down her spine. Felipe quickly pulled back with a shy smile. "Sorry, Auntie," he murmured, and Marina just shook her head, as if it were nothing. But inside, a strange warmth grew, bringing up questions she had been avoiding for a long time. Loneliness had a weight that, at that moment, seemed even harder to ignore. Later that night, Marina heard footsteps in the hallway. For a moment, she thought it was her husband, Roberto. But when she opened the door, she found Felipe. He was nervous, with a lost look in his eyes. "Is everything okay, Felipe?" she asked, frowning. I just can't sleep," he answered, running his hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. Marina invited him to sit on the sofa in the bedroom, trying to calm him with her soft voice. As they talked, Felipe's eyes seemed to carry a mix of gratitude and something deeper. His intense gaze made Marina's heart race like it hadn't in a long time. She took a deep breath, trying to control the turmoil inside her. "Let's rest. Tomorrow will be a new day," she suggested, standing up. But as Felipe returned to his room, the tension between them remained in the air, like a flame that insisted on not going out. The next morning, Marina was already in the kitchen making coffee when she heard Felipe's footsteps coming down the stairs. When she turned around, their eyes met. It wasn't just a simple look. There was something deep there, a silent play of emotions that neither of them had the courage to verbalize. Marina quickly looked away, trying to ignore the heat that rose to her face. "You should relax a little at the beach today," she suggested in a casual tone, as she placed a cup of coffee on the table. Felipe smiled slightly, but with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Will you come with me?" He threw the question out as if he knew exactly how it would affect her. Marina hesitated. Every part of her knew she should say no. But the idea of walking with him on the beach under the warm sun was too tempting. "Maybe later," she answered, trying to maintain her composure. Later, when Felipe returned from the beach, Marina decided it would be her turn. She chose an elegant black swimsuit, simple but that highlighted her curves subtly. When she reached the sand, She found Felipe sitting, watching the horizon, carefree, with his hair messed up by the wind. "You came," he said, smiling in a way that seemed to light up everything around him. They spent the afternoon talking, as if time had stopped. They talked about childhood memories, dreams, and future plans. With each shared laugh and each exchange of glances, Marina felt the barrier she had tried so hard to maintain dissolving. "You've changed a lot," she commented, as she watched him with a smile on her lips. He looked at her, shy but confident. "And you're still the same. Always so elegant." He blushed as he finished the sentence, and the silence that followed was filled only by the sound of the waves breaking on the beach. When they returned home, the dynamic between them seemed different, more charged with energy. In the kitchen, while they were cooking together, an accidental touch between their hands made Marina feel that familiar shiver run down her spine. "Sorry, Auntie," Felipe said, almost in a whisper. Marina smiled slightly, but inside she was struggling to keep herself together. During dinner, the tension was almost palpable, as if the unspoken words were floating in the air around them. Later, when Marina was already in her room, ready to rest, she heard a soft knock on the door. "Auntie, are you awake?" It was Felipe's voice. She hesitated, but answered, "Yes, you can come in." He opened the door slowly, seemed nervous, but there was something in his posture that showed determination. "I need to tell you something," he began, looking into her eyes. Marina remained silent, waiting. "You know I admire you a lot, don't you?" Felipe said, his voice a little shaky. "But lately it's different. I don't know how to explain it, but I can't get you out of my head." The confession left him vulnerable, but he remained there, waiting for her answer. Marina felt torn. She knew there was something wrong with what was happening, but at the same time she couldn't deny her own feelings. Her heart was a mess. The next morning, the atmosphere between them was heavy. Marina tried to distract herself with household chores, but her thoughts kept returning to Felipe. He spent more time in his room, which gave her a brief respite, or perhaps more time to reflect. Felipe's words echoed in her mind, and she knew that somehow nothing would ever be the same again. Later, in the garden, Marina was lost in thought as the gentle wind rustled the leaves around her. Felipe appeared silently, standing at a respectful distance. He didn't want to invade her space, but he couldn't stay away either. "You seem thoughtful," he said, his voice low and gentle. Marina sighed, staring into the distance. "I'm just trying to enjoy the day, but my mind is somewhere else." Felipe hesitated before speaking again, his expression serious. "Can I be honest with you?" he asked, his gaze fixed on her. Marina raised her eyebrows, curious and apprehensive at the same time. "Of course, Felipe. Always." He took a deep breath, as if he needed to gather his courage. "I don't want things to change between us, but at the same time I can't ignore how I feel. Being around you, it's hard to explain." His words made Marina's heart race, but she knew she needed to control the situation. She stood up quickly, as if the movement could dissipate the tension. "I think we need some space," she said, avoiding looking at him directly. "I'm going to go for a walk. I need to think." Before Felipe could answer, she was already walking towards the gate, leaving behind a mix of frustration and understanding in his eyes. When she returned, she found Felipe in the kitchen, stirring pots and pans and trying to appear calm. He looked at her, giving her a small smile. "I decided to cook something light today. I hope you like it, Auntie," he said, in a clear attempt to ease the weight that hung between them. Marina nodded, but the knot in her stomach wouldn't let her. Later, in the silence of the room, Marina tried to organize her thoughts. Then, a soft knock on the door interrupted her attempt at calm. "Auntie, are you awake?" It was Felipe again. She sighed, opening the door. He seemed nervous but determined. I can't pretend this isn't happening anymore, he confessed, his eyes burning with emotion. He approached, stopping a few steps away from her. I never wanted to hurt you, Auntie, but I can't help what I feel, he continued, his voice trembling. With a gentle gesture, he touched her face, and Marina closed her eyes, fighting against the avalanche of feelings that invaded her. She wanted to resist, wanted to say something to end it, but the intensity of the moment left her immobile, speechless. The next morning, the atmosphere between them was dense, almost suffocating. Sitting at the coffee table, they exchanged meaningful glances, but neither of them seemed able to break the silence. Finally, Marina spoke. Did you sleep well? The question sounded more like a desperate attempt at normality. Not really, Felipe replied, looking away. Marina knew she couldn't avoid that conversation any longer. She gathered her courage and, with a firm voice, began. Felipe, we need to talk. What happened between us cannot happen again. It was a mistake that should never have happened. His words weighed in the air, and Felipe lowered his head for a moment, before answering in a low but emotional voice. I know it was wrong, but I can't pretend it wasn't real for me. It made me feel alive. His confession hit Marina like a blow. She took a deep breath, trying not to let her emotions take over. Felipe, you need to understand that this can't go on. No matter what we feel, there are limits we can't cross. And we already have. Her voice was filled with pain, but also with certainty. Felipe shook his head, disagreeing, but he knew she was right. After a long silence, he made his decision. I think it's best for me to leave. Staying here will only make things harder, he said, his voice serious but with evident sadness. Marina felt her chest tighten. She wanted to ask him to stay, but she knew he was right. If you think this is the best decision, I respect that, she replied with difficulty. Hours later, Felipe appeared in the living room with a backpack on his back. His expression was a mix of sadness and determination. Thank you for everything, Aunt. These days were different. I'll never forget, he said, looking at her with one last smile. Marina tried to smile back, but the tears escaped before she could control them. As he walked out the door, Marina closed her eyes and let the tears fall freely. She knew that this was the end of something that should never have begun. But at the same time, I knew that the memories of that period would remain engraved forever, like marks that time cannot erase. If you've come this far and want to know the rest of the story, type part 2 there. And if you want to know more stories like this, click on the video on the screen.